Welcome. So whilst we wait for people to join, please take a look at the question on the slide in front of you. Why is a representative and diverse English literature curriculum important to you? You can now head over to our Menti board. The details are on the slide here, and let us know what you think about the question, and we'll pop them in the chat also. I'll just give you one more minute to answer the question and then we will crack on. Great, so good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today to hear about the Lit in Colour story. My name is Lily Appleford and I'm from Pearson, and I'm delighted to welcome Zahida from Penguin, Velda from the Oxford University, and Alba from the Runnymede Trust to give you some background around Lit in Colour. So we'll just start with a couple of introductions. So Zahida, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone, my name is Zahida Nabagarika. I'm Lit in Colour Programme Manager and I work between Penguin Random House and the Runnymede Trust, basically delivering core activities in the campaign.
Velda?
Hi, I'm Velda Elliott. I am Associate Professor of English and Literacy Education at Oxford, where I work with trainee teachers and educational researchers of all sorts. And I was the lead on the research report for Lit in Colour.
Fab. And last but not least, Alba.
Hi everyone, I'm Alba Kapoor and I'm the Senior Policy Officer at the Runnymede Trust, and I've been supporting the Lit in Colour project from the Runnymede side. Great to see you all.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to kick off with some questions. Feel free to add your own questions in our Q&A box on Zoom as well, and we will run through those at the end. So I'm going to start with Zahida. Could you tell us about the Lit in Colour campaign and its activities? I will stop sharing my screen for you.
Great. Yeah, so Lit in Colour is a Penguin campaign and we run it in partnership with the UK's leading race equality think tank, the Runnymede Trust. The campaign is all about supporting schools to make the teaching of English literature more inclusive of writers of colour. Now, the campaign really started the idea for it started in 2019 when one of our imprints, it was Murky Books, which is grime artist Stormzy's imprint. They did some insight research with young people and they asked a question, what do you read for pleasure? And young people were saying, I don't read for pleasure. What I read in school actively turns me off reading. So this obviously isn't good if we want readers of the future, but also just thinking about the breadth of literature out there, what you get offered in school really doesn't show what there is that you can read. So we took this and then combined that with all the events that happened last year in terms of the murder of George Floyd, students actively getting in touch with their teachers, with their schools and asking, why isn't my curriculum more representative? So that was kind of how the idea for it came into being through these different things that happened in the company and around the world. But now we've kind of done the first phase of the Lit in Colour campaign, which was all about the research, and I'm going to let Velda talk more about that later. And we're now in this second phase, which is actually making practical solutions to this very complex issue of why English literature isn't more representative in the UK. One of the things that we have been doing is creating Lit in Colour teaching resources. We created two for schools. This was before the research was launched. They're called the Lit in Colour Incomplete Book Lists. And this was because we had a lot of feedback coming from teachers saying they didn't quite know where to find great books by writers of colour, just wanted some help and ideas for texts that they could take into the classroom and suggest to their students to read. We have created one for Key Stage 2 and one for Key Stage 3 to 5. And it's publisher agnostic, so it's not just Penguin texts, it's all our fellow publishers as well. It's got little write-ups, kind of themes, topics that the books cover, and then links to where you can actually go and find the books and read further reviews for yourself. This isn't just for teachers, it is also for young people themselves and parents should they want to find out a bit more about text by writers of colour. We also have primary teaching resources, and I've got a couple of them listed up here. These are all free to download from penguin.co.uk, but we also have them on our partner site. Well, we're partnering with TES and they host all our resources as well. These are our secondary resources. These range from Key Stage 3 up to Key Stage 5. They all have a multimedia aspect. So there's a video where the author is speaking about the extract of the text that students can engage with and then answer the activities in the PowerPoint. And some of them are for Key Stage 4, they're actually mock exam papers as well. But just to go back a bit to this slide and actually talk a bit about our partners, we've been really lucky in that we've got some really amazing core partners. Pearson EdXL, thank you very much, you're here today, but also the Black Writers Guild, OCR, the National Literacy Trust, and Oxford University Press. And in no way at all is kind of Penguin as a publisher saying we are educational specialists. What we're saying is, we publish lots and lots of books and we want to get them to schools to make the teaching of English literature more inclusive, because we know that we publish lots of brilliant authors of colour, but that connection sometimes isn't quite making it. So with these partners, we're actively working towards making that a reality so that teachers can know what we're publishing and use it in their classrooms, and young people know what we're publishing as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides and stop there.
Thanks, Zahida. And Velda, would you be able to speak about the research process and talk us through sort of the key findings of the Lit in Colour report?
Sure. Zahida, could you put up the key findings slide, please? Thank you. So the research report was essentially the kind of the first major thing that we embarked on with the Lit in Colour project. And one of the things we wanted to do was not to kind of do some more research which said people think we should have a more diverse curriculum, but rather to think, starting from the principle we should have a more diverse curriculum and look at what the barriers are. Why is this not happening? We did a number of different things. We looked at the data that's out there about what people are actually studying, which you can get for GCSE texts, or we could for 2019, which was of course the last time we had any exams, and we'll be getting, hopefully there'll be some updated and better figures for this year, for 2022. And so we conducted a survey with teachers from primary and secondary schools, which there was about 250 teachers who took part in that. And interestingly, a quarter of the teachers who took part in that identified as Black, Asian or minority ethnic, compared to about 15% of teachers in England as a whole. And we think that it's likely that there's slightly fewer Black and Asian teachers within English as a subject. And we conducted interviews. We did 37 interviews with 49 participants, and those included teachers from primary and secondary schools, senior leadership team members, librarians, awarding bodies like Pearson, subject associations, people working in initial teacher education, so PGCE tutors, and trainee teachers as well. And then we also commissioned some research with young people in qualitative and quantitative form, and some of the youth responses here are from that quantitative representative survey. So these are our key findings, and I think I'll just run through a few of these. One of the important things to remember is that basically there are 34.4% of school students in England who are not white British, and that is a higher percentage in the school population than in the population as a whole. So we have a much more diverse school population than adult population. And we discovered that fewer than 1% of candidates in 2019 on English literature answered a question on a novel by an author of colour. So there's only one place where you can do that, that's the modern text. And basically the two novels that were available that this could be were Mira Sayal's Anita and Me and Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go. So there was no option to study a full-length text by a Black author anyway. Now, there have been some changes. Pearson led the way in making the changes on the curriculum. But as I said, we haven't had examinations since that happened. And now OCR are also making some changes. When I discovered that, I did the figures and I calculated it, looking at that 1%. And I had to do them 3 or 4 times to make sure that I was absolutely certain that this was true, because I thought it would be small. I didn't think it would be that small. So it's actually 0.7%. And the majority of that is Never Let Me Go. So only 0.1% of candidates answered on Anita and Me by Mira Sayal. So if you're a woman of colour, you're even less represented in the curriculum. Kind of incidentally to that, we also looked at the number of students answering on a novel by a woman. So this also includes the 19th century texts by Jane Austen, things like that. And that's still only 7%. 6% of candidates answer on a novel by a woman in relation to the Victorian era. 1% answer on a novel by a woman or a play by a woman in the modern era. And that itself is also, you know, we are not just looking at a white curriculum, we are largely looking at a white male curriculum. One of the interesting things was that when we talked to secondary school teachers and surveyed them where we're getting text into the curriculum, it's in poetry. Single poems are really easy to insert into the curriculum. And since the report has been issued, I've been doing some further analysis with Matthew Courtney, who was one of the research assistants who worked on the survey data. And we've looked at those poems, and for the majority of the poems, they are about being Black or being an immigrant or being someone who is struggling with multilingualism. And so it's definitely a feeling that, you know, to be on the curriculum, you have to be writing about being Black, you have to be writing about the experience of being an ethnic minority. And that is, I think, even more worrying than the fact that there are so few things on the curriculum. We also noticed that there were quite a few extracts. So people were talking about using extracts from Michelle and Barack Obama's writings. They were talking about using speeches, but clearly it's about people had made changes following the Black Lives Matter protests, but the changes they had made seemed to be relatively tokenistic and were not about proper curriculum change. And that is reflected by the fact that the youth survey respondents, 82% of them did not recall ever studying a text by a Black, Asian or minority ethnic author. And we're assuming that that's a novel or a play, because they will probably have done a poem, but they don't remember it because it's such a small part of their time. However, the children really do want a diverse curriculum. So 70% of the youth survey respondents and 77% if they were Black, Asian or minority ethnic survey respondents agree that diversity is part of British society and should be represented in the school curriculum. People want to see this in schools. And when children and young people engage with interesting and exciting diverse texts, they want to read, they want to get engaged. And we talked to a librarian in Birmingham who talks about Nikesh Shukla's The Boxer, which flies off the shelves every time it comes into the library, not because Asian boys are trying to read something that represents them, because all the boys want to read about The Boxer. And it's so if you've got something which is engaging, modern, you know, up to date, grabs their attention, that's what makes people want to read. We looked at what the barriers were, and essentially I think everyone will recognise these as important. Time is a big barrier to changing the curriculum. We've been through a massive period of change in the English curriculum over the last 5 years or so, and the people have simply not had the time to develop new resources and to put new things into their curriculums. So people have tried to maintain what they had. If Mice and Men gets cut from the GCSE curriculum, it gets pushed back into the Key Stage 3 curriculum because they've got the texts, they've got the schemes of work. And people don't necessarily have the time either to go out and look for what books and texts they should be teaching, which is why the incomplete book lists are such a great resource. A second problem is money. Schools are very short on money, we all know this. And buying sets of texts is considered a problem. You know, we stick with what we've got. And this is one of the reasons why English curriculums tend to be quite conservative. Another problem with subject knowledge, kind of broader subject knowledge about post-colonial readings of texts, which books to read, who's out there, what are the good authors, but also for things like the confidence to then take a book and develop the materials that would be right for that book to teach in the classroom. So people are confident about their knowledge of an inspector calls, but they're not necessarily confident about their subject knowledge of specific books and how you can then teach them. And that leads on to this final comment barrier, which is about teacher confidence, which is not only confidence with individual texts, but also the challenge of talking about racism in the classroom, how to deal with problematic issues, how to deal with racial slurs, all of those kinds of things, and how you address that with students. This is probably reflected in the fact that the teaching profession is overwhelmingly white, and that teachers of English are overwhelmingly white. I mean, I'm an English teacher, or I was an English teacher, and this is something which has come up again and again in my work as an initial teacher educator. We have Leslie Nelson Addy, who was another author on this report, is one of our PGC tutors at Oxford, and we have time and time again Black students who come into our course and realise that this is the first time they've ever been taught by a Black English teacher, and this is the first time that they've engaged with that, and that just shouldn't be the case. And I have to say, going to the big green box at the bottom, 12% of secondary teachers and 13% of primary teachers in the survey said that they'd had training on how to talk about race as part of their initial teacher education. Now, we had quite a broad range of experience within our survey respondents, including people who've been teaching for over 20 years. I think that this is different if you look at it for the more recent students, the more recent qualified teachers. This is definitely something which is much more which people are much more aware of in the IT courses, and certainly it's something that we've been pushing in our course for at least the last 5 years. So it is something which is becoming more relevant, or people are becoming more aware of it. And one of the kind of final key things that we wanted to emphasize is that this is not just about introducing or replacing texts on the curriculum. It's also about acknowledging that race and empire, racism, are an important part of knowledge about British literary heritage texts. We have a lot of Victorian literature on our curriculum. It is set in a time of empire. It is not necessarily explicit, but it has huge repercussions for the text. Thinking about where the money comes from for the Jane Austen's families, thinking about Heathcliff, who is definitely racialised as other, thinking about Magwitch in Great Expectations, and the fact that he's transported to Australia and then makes a huge fortune exploiting that the country that he's sent to. And so all of those things are important to refer to, and one of the things that English teachers can do is kind of disrupt the white gaze that we have on texts and start thinking about things in a much broader context. So that's the key findings.
Thanks, Velda. I think everyone will agree some of those stats are absolutely shocking. I remember when I saw them for the first time, I was kind of stopped in my tracks. Moving on to Alba now, from the Runnymede Trust perspective, why is a campaign like this important, and kind of where else do you see those systemic issues?
I think, first to start with, Velda puts it so brilliantly by talking about the sort of broader integration of conversations around anti-racism by looking at something like the English literature curriculum. And over the last few years, I think this importance has really shown itself. For example, the Windrush Lessons Learned review, which was kind of looking into the Windrush scandal in 2018, thought that it was in part able to happen because of a poor understanding of Britain's colonial history. The urgency of diversifying the curriculum can be seen because of the impact that it has on Black and ethnic minority communities across society. And more recently, we saw with the tragic death of George Floyd and the subsequent kind of protest that came out of that, the importance of conversations about Britain's multi-ethnic past, about the histories of race, migration, and empire, but also about how that fits not just in teaching history, but also in teaching English and across the curriculum. And I think this kind of the events of the last years have really brought cause onto all of us to think about what it means for more diverse curriculums to be part of our schooling, but also for curriculums to be truly reflective of British society. And those statistics that are in the Lit in Colour report show how dire the situation is and how much there is to change. I think the other part of it, of course, is that we live in a society where racial stereotypes exist, and they continue to be very pervasive in our popular belief. Polling show the extent of those beliefs, and that really education is a first step and a really important step in engaging with this. And it means transforming the curriculum really to be able to look broadly at how we engage with ethnic minority Britons, but also how we engage with sort of racism in our society. So, I mean, that's kind of where we come to as the Runnymede Trust to these issues, is we look at what really has happened over the last few years. This is a long campaign really around diversifying the curriculum. It didn't just start a few years ago, but it has been re-energized in a really important way. And we are seeing the real world effects of failing to teach curriculums that are representative of Black and ethnic minority groups. And what Lit in Colour does specifically as a campaign is it helps to address these gaps in literature, which is often lesser focused on than sort of the history curriculum, which has got a lot of airtime in recent years and has a really important place. But what it does, most importantly, is really engage with how teachers should be thinking about teaching Black and ethnic minority authors, but also more broadly, and as Velda pointed out, histories of empire, histories of race, histories of migration that are fundamental to these texts and are an important part of it. It just simply cannot be that for Black and ethnic minority students who represent over 30% of the school population, that only 1% of them study a GCSE, a book by a writer of colour. It just cannot be. But we also want to emphasise, and I think this is part of what Runnymede wants to talk about more broadly in relation to diversifying the curriculum, is the fundamental importance of this for all students, not just students of colour. It gives us all a broader understanding of the varied and wide-ranging cultural inputs that make up our society, but also gives us a sense of empathy and engagement with different experiences. And I think the kind of final thing to end on here is that what it does, and again, Velda pointed to this, it fundamentally revives an engagement with English literature for all students too. So we see this as a broad, important part of embedding anti-racism in our schools, and so that kind of pours out into society more broadly. And we know that this campaign has a very important part of that, and building that sense of belonging and empathy in schools.
Thanks, Alva. Zahida, can you tell us a bit about the engagement that you've had with Lit in Colour's key audiences?
Yeah, so Lit in Colour's key audiences really are teachers, but also young people. We wanted to put young people really at the heart of the campaign, because they're going through the curriculum, they're reading these texts, and they're being turned off literature. So we started at the launch of the campaign, well, at the launch of the research, which was in June. 2 weeks later, we launched a competition called the Lit in Colour Creative Student Prize. And this was for 14 to 18-year-olds to answer the question, what place do books have in your world? And we realized we wanted this not just to be for the kids that love books. We obviously want to hear from them, but also the kids that maybe don't see themselves or would just like to tackle the question in a maybe not in your average way of an essay or a short story. But we also entered artwork, video, and poetry in. And we were really excited by just how many responses we got. We got over 400 submissions. And I'm actually going to play you the winning one, which is this brilliant spoken word video from 15-year-old Emanuela Emo. And we're going to be running this again next year because it was such a brilliant way to engage with young people and hear what they actually think. And we had different prizes. So Emanuela Emo is very lucky. She's won a MacBook Air with the Adobe Suite on it. We also had some headphones by Dre, and then some other subscriptions as well for the runners up. But I'm just going to share my screen and play you her winning submission now.
Sometimes I indulge myself within the white sheeted seas, Some write within their vernacular, others expand from their small parameter. I read about the blasphemer or comets in Japanese. The books I read are printed with facts and statistics laced with true accounts without any hypocrisies, only to be overlooked and hardly understood mostly by the so-called autocracy. The books I read are fanatical. At school, the books are mathematical. In fact, books are all fantastical. I like the books with characters that look like me, thick hair, brown eyes, and dark skin, since we all need a little diversity. It's good to read and submerge into the author's mentality, understand the bleak reality or the homosexuality, because without this, there is no more normality. As you continue to live in vanity, spewing out profanities to others of disparity, why don't we see the books with characters of dissimilarity? Or about the holy place of Galilee, or the inspirational books that give us renewed vitality, or show us books that teach us simple morality. Sometimes I indulge myself in the white sheeted seas, slumping with annoyance, jumping with joy, or crying with grief. We react however we please. After all, a book is what you perceive.
So I'm sure you'll agree, that's pretty amazing. And yeah, we were so happy to receive all the brilliant submissions, and it really was a joy reading them. They're all available to read on our website, penguin.co.uk, and we're going to be doing some more work with the winners, getting their voices a bit louder next year, so do keep tuned. But our other main audience was teachers. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we at Penguin are not experts in education or teachers, so that's why we partnered with TES Global, who have brilliant reach in terms of teachers in this country, but also internationally. We were aware that with the research, as Velda talked you through, quite a lot of really hard statistics, really hard things to kind of get a grip of, and easy to, I guess, feel quite down about it. So we wanted to have some preview webinars where we'd actually give teachers an insight before we actually published the research, so they could kind of get ahead of it and have a conversation, because obviously a lot of it is not new to them. They know what they're struggling with, but it was really important that we had that space. And the conversations that we had with TES journalists on their website hosting channel were really good. We had one with primary teachers and then another one with secondary. And then after that, we also put all our resources on TES's website, but they also helped us reach out to teachers at the launch of the research with our Lit in Colour book giveaway, which is where we gave 500 schools across the UK the opportunity to win 100 books that Penguin publishes by writers of colour. Now, we were really overwhelmed by just how many schools got in touch with us. We heard from just under half of all the secondary schools in the country, and we asked them to tell us in 100 words, just a bit about their school, what their student population was like, how embedded is reading, what their library provision is like. And it really came back just how many schools are struggling, just how many schools after COVID, they don't have libraries, they don't have librarians. Teachers are having to, scour car boot sales and charity shops for books. And that, again, it simply can't be. And we as a publisher, we can send books. So that is something that we committed to do this year. And all the schools got their books, and we're going to be doing it again next year, because again, we realized we got so many applications and we couldn't give to everyone last year, but we're going to give to everyone again, or as many as we can this year, in 2022. And we're also going to be opening that up to primary schools as well. I think also, though, another way that we've at the launch wanted to engage, and this kind of goes with the preview webinars, was giving teachers the tools to actually think critically about what is taught in their departments. So the webinars that we did with TES, they also had some audit tools which are free and downloadable from TES, but also our website, where teachers can take a PowerPoint that we've created already. It has all the statistics on it, all the findings. You can actually have a discussion within your department specifically to raise awareness. How many people are aware that this is an issue, how many people would like to do something about it. So we created that PowerPoint and then an audit tool where hopefully you within your department can look at everything that is taught in English and actually think critically about, well, is this right here? Maybe we should change it. And we've been promoting these resources because we want them to be used. We're hoping that they can help, and we've had really brilliant feedback so far, and we're wanting to do a lot more. So those are our two key audiences, and we've had good engagement.
Thanks, Zahida. Wow, that winning entry was incredible. I hadn't seen that before. It was really, really powerful. And Alba, what other work is the Runnymede Trust doing in the space of education with teacher-facing organisations?
Yeah, so Runnymede has been part of this conversation, as I kind of mentioned, for a long time. And we've been working both in the history space and now in relation to English literature as well. So one of the things that we're doing, and this has a lot of it has a big relationship with some of the webinars that's been going on the Lit in Colour side as well, and more generally, is a partnership with the National Education Union, which is a set of webinars looking at what it means to teach race, migration, empire in both the English and history curriculums. And what we're trying to do with these, and I think this is fundamental and sort of part of what Lit in Colour is, but also what we've tried to do with the history curriculum as well, is give teachers the tools that they need to bring these lessons into the classroom, and to do so in an accessible, pragmatic way, because we know the constraints on teachers at the moment. And so these sets of webinars run with Lit in Colour will give a sort of sample lesson plan looking into a specific area of history and literature. So for example, we did one on histories of South Asian migration in relation to South Asian authors. And it brings together these two lessons and lesson plans in a really accessible and exciting way. So I'm happy to share information about that if anyone else is interested. And some other areas of work and focus in this space has been our work in partnership with the universities of Manchester and Cambridge on our migration story resource. And what this is it's a sort of one-stop shop for histories of migration and teaching histories of migration in school, and does what the primary and secondary resources do with the Lit in Colour project for history lessons too. And again, I'm very happy to share those links in the chat. And it's a really useful way of thinking about lesson plans that bring these histories of migration alive, because fundamentally it says that these are histories that we all share. They aren't just specific to Black and ethnic minority populations in this country. And I think the final thing that I'd sort of flag is we've done some work in conjunction with the University of Liverpool on a sort of teaching fellowship in both history and in relation to both history and English, and it sort of looks at what works for teachers when teaching more diverse curriculums, and there are some really interesting findings there about how teachers might go about it, and also what sort of teachers' feelings are in relation to this. So if you're interested, again, I will share that. And I just wanted to, sorry, one more thing, to flag that we've been doing some broader work on anti-racism in the curriculum as well. So there's this really great report by Remy Joseph Salisbury called Race and Racism in Secondary Schools. And it's looking specifically at how do we embed anti-racism within our schools, not only kind of beyond the curriculum, but also what do we use from our lessons about the curriculum to kind of think about this, about what's going on in schools more generally. So I will share those all if everyone would like to see them, and please let me know if you've got any questions about it in the Q&A afterwards as well.
Thanks, Alba. Yeah, those links would be really, really useful, I'm sure. Thank you. One final question from me for all of you. So the campaign started over a year ago now. So are you each able to talk a little bit about what engagement has been like for teachers and students, and what you're kind of hoping for going forward as well? Should we start with you, Velda?
Sure. I think engagement's been really good. I mean, obviously I work mostly in the field of initial teacher education, and I think this is something which is really, it's really on the agenda for everybody who's working in initial teacher education for English at the moment. And so we've talked at network meetings in Nottingham. We've had a National Education Day focused on it. NATE, who is the Association of Teachers of English, have got a working group building on this and are running regular trainings on these kinds of issues. And I think I've been so pleased to see the way that people have engaged with it, and are really keen to see change happening. And I think one of the best things is kind of the little things that you see on the grassroots level. So when people talk to you and go, oh yeah, and by the way, we've introduced this as our non-examined assessment, our coursework at A-level is now My Sister the Serial Killer and something else. And it's those kinds of little conversations that I've been having, and when people talk about how much their students enjoy it, that's really been one of the best things for me.
Thank you. What about you, Zahida?
I think it's been the really positive way that the research and the whole campaign has been received from teachers. And I think particularly with the Pearson Pioneers Lit in Colour activity that we've been doing, I think the overwhelming response we got at schools wanting to sign up for that has been really brilliant. And I think all the news that came out when OCR, the other exam board we're working with, when they announced their changes, it's all, you know, really building up to hopefully lasting change. So I think that's been really key. One thing I didn't talk about though was that to reach young people, we also started a Lit in Colour TikTok channel where we have book talkers talking to young people about brilliant books. And again, this is publisher agnostic. And for me, that has been a real joy, like just watching the fantastic book recommendations that are coming from these young people and the comments that young people are then commenting back. So I think it's really encouraging, and I think we will have lots and lots of future readers reading diversely, hopefully for years to come.
I love that. I have to admit, I am a lover of book-related TikToks, so I might have to check that one out. And finally, Alba.
Yeah, I sort of echo what both Velda and Zahida have said. I mean, it's been incredible to see the reception from young people specifically. And what's amazing is that, as you see with that sort of submission, you know, that video submission, is that they are so aware of these questions and these issues and how it impacts their lives. And that has been a really thrilling thing to see, that what we're doing with Lit in Colour really does engage young people with where they're at, and they have a very advanced level of conversations on these topics, and that's been really, really exciting to see. I think the other things, of course, has just been sort of the appetite for this work, and sort of Pearson Pioneers, all of these incredible sort of projects that are engaging within schools seem to be really taken up and engaged with by teachers and students alike, and it feels like this is a campaign that seems to be sort of absorbing what teachers and students want, and delivering that. So that's just been a really exciting thing to experience and be part of.
Brilliant. So that is the end of my list of questions, but this is a great opportunity for any of our participants. If you would like to ask a question of any of our wonderful panel, now is your chance. So I'll give you a minute to pop some questions in the chat. Okay, it doesn't look like we've, oh no, I'm wrong. We have a question from Sally. Do you think the IGCSE will start to diversify soon? Do any of you feel like you could have a go hack at answering that one? It's probably more of a question for Pearson.
I think there's, with the IGCSE and still with the GCSE, actually, with other exam boards, there is huge scope for change, and the IGCSE has a lot more freedom than the GCSE, and particularly given that there's a lot of the people studying the IGCSE are from across the world. I think that it's a really good place that could have some really interesting diversification. I am not sure if it will or will not.
Yeah, I will try and see if we can get an answer from Pearson on that question as well. We have another question from Martin. Have you come up against any resistant voices? And if so, what kind of arguments are you hearing from people?
I think we can all probably have a go at answering that one. Do you want to go first, Velda?
I was just thinking, so before Lit in Colour became a thing, Leslie and I both wrote pieces in the NATE Teaching English magazine about how to diversify your curriculum and kind of changing the narrative a bit. And we had a response from the head of English at a public school, who essentially, his line was, well, people shouldn't have, you need to learn to see other people than yourself in your English curriculum. It's not about representation. And my kind of response to that was, yes, that's what we're saying. We want your students to see people other than themselves represented in their curriculum. I think the kind of main argument goes along the lines of canon and powerful knowledge. And I think that the things to say are that, you know, Black British writing is right up there at the moment. It's some of the best and most excellent literature being produced in the world. You know, Kazuo Ishiguro is our only living Nobel laureate in this country, and this is really exciting, powerful, good literature. And you know, Bernardine Evaristo's Girl, Woman, Other has just been put on the syllabus at OCR, and that's something which students were already engaging with for coursework. And I think that's the real kind of push here. And we're not saying get rid of canon. What we're saying is expand your knowledge of canon, understand the actual background in which it was written. So sorry, I've kind of doubled that. I've kind of said what the arguments are and how I react when I hear them.
I think in terms of some resistant voices that I've come across in the last 12 months, not so much resistant, but just a real difference in levels of awareness in terms of different parts of the country. And I think this question, you know, it's I can understand, you know, why that might be. There was a presentation that I was doing with some teachers in the Northeast, and one of the comments I had was, well, this is very nice, but it doesn't really matter for me because I don't have any students of colour. So again, it's really getting the point across that actually this benefits all students, not just students of colour. Students you know, of white English heritage also will benefit greatly from a diverse curriculum. And I think that for me is the main, and it's not resistance, it's just, you know, you don't know what you don't know. So again, I think having the time to talk with teachers, having the time to raise that awareness, to really talk through, you know, what is at stake. And then I think it becomes a much easier conversation. But off the bat, that is something that I've definitely had over the last year or so.
Yeah, I think similarly, I mean, I think the biggest one that keeps on sort of coming back is the question of losing Shakespeare and Charles Dickens and replacing them with writers of colour. And I think, you know, we're very clear that this is not what Lit in Colour is about. It's about recognizing the context in which those writers were writing, engaging with them, actually sort of illuminating more parts of their work as well as part of what it means to diversify the English literature curriculum. But also there is also space for writers of colour in this story. It's just saying that the story needs to be much more expansive than it currently is. And it's not about deleting sort of parts of our literary history. So that's, I think, one of the key areas. And I think it's also like, it would be sort of important to say that diversifying the curriculum more broadly as a debate in our society has an important sort of, it has had important sort of explosive points over the last years, and inevitably sort of these conversations come out and there are resistance in relation to the broader sort of narratives around what it means to diversify the curriculum. And I think as long as we kind of go through with clear messaging that this is about sort of and the reality that these are about campaigns that affect everyone, all children in school, and sort of build us more as a society, as a more equal and intolerant society, then that's sort of what we should press ahead with when we met with these messages of resistance.
Thank you. The questions are now flooding in. Do you think lockdown and the past 18 months has impacted pupils in regards to access to lit in colour and diverse texts?
I can get that one first. Yes, definitely. I think you know, there are some parts of maybe this discussion where people might say, well, actually, this is a bit of a luxury. We need to make sure that our students still remember how to do basic things. We need to make sure that they are, you know, safeguarded. All these other issues that lockdown has thrown up for us. We realize that this is a crazy time and teachers are having so much to deal with. But I think I'll just go back to the positivity that we've had in terms of the response and in terms of people getting in touch and in terms of people, you know, maybe still even only now just hearing about it and saying, look, how can I get involved? What can I do? And I think that's a really great thing. And that's not just students, that's teachers. Sorry, that's not just teachers, that is students as well. And thinking about, well, you know, what can I read? Where can I start? Can I start like a book club? Or if I don't really like reading, can I start with, you know, a film adaptation, that kind of thing? So I think it has been difficult, but we're hopefully getting there. And I would say that the internet has been brilliant in that sense. Obviously, not everyone has access to it, but it has really made a great difference in reaching audiences. Hope I've answered your question.
Albert or Velda, do you have a comment on this as well?
Just to say that in the survey, we had a number of people who said that they had been going to make changes in their curriculum, but then COVID hit and they couldn't because they had to deal with a whole load of other stuff. So I think it has probably delayed change in some kind of bigger changes in some schools. But I'm hopeful that people are coming back now, and kind of, well, people are coming back. That, you know, we've heard a lot of schools who are doing a different novel this year in Key Stage 3. We've replaced Of Mice and Men with, say, A Colour's the Dark Lady, you know, all those kind of things. So I think people are making changes, but that possibly COVID derailed us a little bit from some of the big things in terms of time.
Yeah, I think it's completely that basically time has just been so kind of, there's been so little access to meaningful time for teachers, that sort of implementing these changes, which we try and make as easy as possible with campaigns like Lit in Colour, but do take time and effort from teachers, and becomes so difficult when you're dealing with a national crisis at the same time. But again, that people have been, I think what we have to remember is that this time also coincided with another very sort of reflective time when it comes to thinking about Britain's history with race, and also racial equality in Britain more generally. So I think these two things have coincided. So there has also been this incredible willingness to engage with these issues, which we have really hugely benefited from and found engagement with.
Next question, what are your key aims for the next 12 months in your respective areas? How will these be achieved in smaller steps, and how can we help as secondary school teachers?
I can just start from Lit in Colour. So the campaign, we're continuing to work with our key programme partners. So that's Pearson EdXL, that's also OCR. We're also thinking more about what other resources can we create. So we've had a lot of engagement from teachers on this. We've had quite a few primary teachers ask for an early years and Key Stage 1 Lit in Colour incomplete book list. So we're going to be producing that in around Easter next year. We're also, as I said, continuing to engage with our young people audience. So through our creative student prize, we're going to try and amplify that so we get even more engagement. But we're also starting to think about how we can move beyond just England, because we realized that the research was done just on English classrooms, and we know that, you know, in Wales they're actually doing amazing things, and the government is supporting real change. So we're keen to support what's going on there and look specifically at literature and how we can kind of use the Lit in Colour report in England to inform maybe something that we might do with the Welsh government, but also really just continuing to raise awareness, because that it's not like we've done the research, it's there. We need to keep talking about it. Those teachers that I talked about in the Northeast, they need to be talked to more. We need to get books to them. We need to engage further because of all the things that could potentially come. And as Albert was saying, you just want to take Shakespeare off the curriculum. That isn't just a conversation that needs to be shut down. That's a conversation that needs to be had and really engaged with. So we're also going to be continuing to do that over the next year, because that's a really important part. And it's not really just about the curriculum. It is about, you know, us as a country. Where do we stand on these things? You know, why don't we talk about Black Elizabethans more? Why don't we talk about, you know, the multiculturalism that Shakespeare was writing about more? It's fascinating. So there's a lot more of that needs to be happening. And also, you know, doing things like this, talking to teachers with our partners. So that's just from Penguin Lit in Colour.
I can just go off that because I think that links in really well with sort of Runnymede's key aims in relation to diversifying the curriculum more broadly, but also our sort of broader education work. And I think what we really want to do over the next sort of 12 months is to think carefully about how we can link the different campaigns that we've got going on at the moment. We have done lots of work on teaching race, migration, empire, and this incredible work around the English curriculum as well. And I think what we're finding is there are so many ways in which they interlink. It's not, you know, for example, within Shakespeare, we're talking about historical context, and we're talking about sort of opportunities to represent people of colour in a different way in literature. And so this is a really, I think, exciting sort of moment for us to start thinking about those connections and bringing them together in things like the NEU webinar series that we've been doing, but also looking more broadly at what that means for anti-racism in schools, and how we can sort of start that conversation, which really looks at systems and how the conversations around the curriculum fit within the broader systems pieces in schools. So I think that's something that we are very kind of determined to be looking at, and yeah, watch this space for more on that as well.
Thanks. Velda, do you have anything to add?
Kind of more personally, I've just got a little bit of funding to do some work for Canon in Colour, and we're going to be developing some resources for developing subject knowledge for teachers in terms of teaching those 19th century novels with the context of race and empire, which I'm very excited about. So that's a kind of watch this space thing. And I'm also embarking on some work on Of Mice and Men, which somebody's mentioned in the questions, and because I think that there is still a large tranche of people who are teaching it and claiming that they're dealing with the race aspect of it thoroughly, and I want to kind of investigate that, see if that's true, but also I think that it would be useful to have a documentation of the harm that people have experienced by having Of Mice and Men taught badly in their schools, and that's something else that I'm hoping to do, because I think that we do need to address this kind of embeddedness of this particular text in our curriculum.
Thank you. We are rapidly running out of time, but I don't know if Zahida or Albert, you also want to comment on this question. So it's, do you believe there is scope to continue to teach texts with racist attitudes exemplified? So thinking of texts like Of Mice and Men and Othello, even anti-Semitism in Dickens or Fitzgerald. We sometimes have a challenge in explaining how these texts are still important pieces of literature, even with the embedded racism.
I would definitely say yes, but I would think about texts that you compare them with, maybe contemporary texts or contemporary writing that rebuts or kind of reviews the work through a particular lens. So I would say yes, but yes, making sure that you have other texts so that students get a wider view of it. That's what I would say.
This is, I think, a really tricky and important question. And I think, I suppose the things that we've kind of continued said on this is to be uncompromising in recognizing the realities of the context in which these writers were writing, and also the implications of what they're saying. And I think it's not too bold to bring modern day discussions about race and racism into a text from the past. And that's sort of, I think, crucial to what it means to teach these texts in the modern day conversation. I think what Zahida says is also really true, that in doing so, what you can do is bring in those modern day writers who have in some ways related to those texts, and perhaps had a different sort of perspective on it. And I think, yeah, there's no choice with these sorts of texts really then to be uncompromising with what was wrong in them, and how to talk about these sort of issues today.
Can I add a bit? Sorry,
yeah.
I really stressed. I mean, I think it depends on the text, and it depends on the teacher, and it depends on the context. Personally, I don't think that it's possible to teach Of Mice and Men properly in Key Stage 3. I don't think the kids have got the maturity to deal with it. And it just the simple question: if you've ever heard a child in a classroom say that Curly's wife was asking for it, you know, that is, if you can't even manage to get that dealt with properly, then I don't think you can deal with crooks. And then also there's the whole disability studies issue to do with the fact of Lenny getting shot at the end and this being presented as a heroic act. There are so many problematic issues with Mice and Men. You really need a lot of time and a lot of sensitivity to deal with it. And there are people to do it really well, but I think that we're kidding ourselves if we think it's everybody. Having said that, I think it is absolutely important to use Othello, and I did my teacher training in Burnley in the height of the BNP era, and they used to use A Merchant of Venice to explore actually anti-Muslim sentiment and the BNP stuff, and that was done really well. And I think that there is some real power in those kinds of texts, but we do need to kind of really engage with it, and if you cannot afford to turn a blind eye to it because there's a message that then sends to the kids in the classroom, they are absorbing what is in those texts, and you need to engage with it.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you. You've answered your questions brilliantly, and I've found this really useful. So hopefully our participants have as well. I'm going to take a couple of minutes now just to talk about what Pearson are doing. And then, this is why I share my screen, can't talk and share screen at the same time. And then we will wrap up. So we have mentioned a couple of times throughout the presentation that we have the Pearson EdXL Listen Colour Pioneers programme. And if you don't know what that is, it was sort of born out of the Listen Colour campaign with Penguin and the Runnymede Trust. And we decided to offer 100 secondary schools across the country the chance to diversify their curriculum. And the Listen Colour Pioneers programme involved Penguin's amazing donation of free copies of our GCSE and A-level set texts, 300 book library donation, lots of support course materials, a dedicated professional development programme, which spans the length of the 2-year course, so GCSE or A-level, training for librarians, author events with the likes of Mallory Blackman, and also racial literacy training from the Black curriculum. And that's a really brief overview of the programme. But if you want to learn more about the programme, you can by visiting go.pearson.com/listencolour. And you heard it here first. We're really excited to be sharing that we'll be running the programme again in 2022. So I will pop a link in the chat now for you to register your interest if you're keen to get involved. And we'll be back in touch in January with more details about how you can do so. And if this session has piqued your interest, you can also join us later today at 2 p.m, where we'll be hearing from some of this year's pioneers to talk about their experiences and also give some practical advice. So yeah, thank you so much everyone for joining us, and a huge thank you to our brilliant panel too. I will just drop that link in the chat, but yeah, thank you everyone for coming.